Dimensions. I've entitled this one, Stringing You Along. This comes out of a super magazine called Creation Ex Nihilo. For some of you, we have some people here that I know are not familiar with this magazine. It's put out not now by the Institute for Creation Research. It's put out by the Answers in Genesis people who are associated with the Institute of Creation Research. These are scientists who believe in creation. Cute little article about dimensions. We have to be very careful. Somebody died recently, and I was talking to the lady, not the lady that died, one of the ladies that was surviving, her daughter. And she said, "Where's heaven? Isn't it true that there are more dimensions than the one we are involved in? Be very careful." Scientists, physicists like myself play all kinds of mind games. There is something called string theory, and now superstring theory. Physicists envision these imaginary things and then attempt to explain them mathematically. In string theory, there's this string that vibrates and oscillates like a particle. It comes out of just plain imagination, cannot be proven. And the idea is that looking for a grid, it's called, if you are a scientist, you will eventually stumble across GUT, gut, grand unification theory. Physicists are always looking for, how does everything all fit together? And what is it all about anyway? Well, the Bible tells you what it's all about. There are 4 dimensions created by God. Height, length, width. We know those. And the 4th is time. And physicists also have struggled with that. But you can plot those 3 dimensions and time. A physicist named Minkowski did that. 4 dimensions. String theory predicts 11 dimensions. First 10, now superstring theory predicts 11 dimensions. None of which you can see. But they're not real. Keep that in mind. Where is heaven? Don't ask a scientist. These things are not real. I wrote a paper once in school when I was taking quantum physics, and my paper proposed doing something with a function called Debye temperature. It's not temperature. It's got nothing to do with temperature. It's a term that falls out of Schrodinger's wave equation, has no relationship with temperature whatsoever. It's called Debye temperature because it has to do with particle motion. Physicists play mind games with you. Don't get hung up on dimensions. I've had men in this church years and years ago talk to me, "Oh, I know there are 10 dimensions out there," and they get very weird. These are not what you think. When a physicist talks about dimensions, he's not talking about what you think. He's talking about the mathematical fallout of his equations. That's what he's talking about. They're not really real. Keep that in mind. Do not turn to science. Where's heaven? God knows. The Bible tells you, Paul himself says, "I was taken to the 3rd heaven. I saw things there that I cannot tell you." Where is it? Is it in that 5th, 6th, and 7th dimension? The 8th, 9th, and 10th dimension? No. No, not at all. It is somewhere. God knows where. God is the one that constructed this earth. God is the one that put everything together the way he put it together. Don't go to science to look for answers like, where are the other dimensions and what are they? And be very careful when you hear a physicist or a mathematician talk about dimensions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Some physicists have told me, in fact, the reason you can't see them is that they operate in subspace, these dimensions. Baloney. They're mathematical fallout. They're not real. And heaven is not in subspace. Well, it could be part of it. Who knows where heaven is? The Bible does not bother to tell you where heaven is. It just tells you that there is heaven. And remember, as the apostles looked up at Jesus going off in the clouds, the angel said he's coming back the same way. Where did he go when he went into the clouds? Who knows? Don't try to, and I've seen Christians try to nail it down. Hell is inside the earth and heaven is up in space somewhere. You don't know that. I doubt that very much. I really don't know. Be careful of what scientists say and be careful of what theologians say. You have the Bible. Stick with the Bible. There are 4 dimensions that you can experience. All right? X, Y, and Z, we call them. Height, length, and width. And time. And time. You can experience those. Those are what the Bible deals with. We know that God has created other worlds. Paul tells us we're battling principalities and powers in other worlds. We know that angels can travel in ways that we cannot. We know that Jesus himself, with his glorified body, traveled in ways that we could not. He came through a door. The only way you and I can go through a door is knock it down. He came right through the wall. Don't get hung up on scientists' definitions of dimensions. There is heaven. Don't try to define where it is. Thank you. The creation moment this morning is your incredible brain. It has nothing to do with my brain. And I was so hoping that Phil wouldn't misspell it. So many times in the past, people misspell my name to brain. And I was afraid he'd say, "You're incredible, Brian," and that wouldn't be true either. Evolution is based on the concept of the survival of the fittest, right? Natural selection. The whole idea is, from the basis of evolution, is that things, in order for you to survive as natural selection proceeded, things developed, but just developed enough, obviously, for you to conquer the next valley, so to speak. That's natural selection. First off, natural selection comes from a creationist. Dr. Edward Blythe developed natural selection 30 years before Darwin published his book. But he did it within the framework, of course, of the created kinds. Well, there is a problem for evolutionists relative to the brain. Believe it or not, as you look around you, everybody in this room has an absolutely marvelous, incredible brain. Now, if you're a wife, I'm sure you're convinced your husband does not. But he really does. Husbands just don't use them. But it's marvelous. If he ever decided to use it, your husband does have an incredible brain. Richard Dawkins is probably the best known neo-Darwinist or evolutionist of this era. He's a physicist that came up with the concept of black holes, for one thing. He is not an atheist per se, but he is an evolutionist. In America, Dr. Edward, what's his name? Wilson. Think of his name. Wilson. He's been pretty well known. He's from Harvard. Dr. Wilson's from Harvard, also a Darwinist. Well, Dr. Wilson is the one that makes the comment here. Kind of interesting. This comes from something called Acts and Facts. It's put out by the Institute for Creation Research. And it's available free to anybody that wants to subscribe to it. He said, there's a problem trying to explain the human brain by natural selection. Now remember, natural selection means that as organisms, as fish crawled out of the ocean and developed into people, they just developed one step at a time, whatever they needed to survive. Well, here's the problem. Evolution of the brain took over 3 million years, but the strangest feature of the process is that the capacity, I'm quoting now, the capacity of the brain far exceeds the needs of mere survival. Problem for evolutionists is your brain. It is far greater, far more awesome than is necessary for mere survival. Don't forget now, the whole basis of evolution is natural selection, survival of the fittest, but only as fit as you need to be to take the next step. Not fit enough to take 40 steps at once. Evolution falls apart if you take 40 steps at once. You have to take just one step at a time. So here's an evolutionist who flat out says the development of the brain is a problem because your brain is too significant. It's too awesome. It's too marvelous. What your brain does is mind-boggling, so to speak. So think about it. Your brain did not form from natural selection. The truth is, you are not the result of a fish crawling up on the shore who eventually developed into a person. You are created by a designing, intelligent, loving creator. And the reason your brain is far more awesome than evolution requires it to be is very simple. God wanted it that way. Thank you. It could definitely be possible. This is the picture of a creature that is called a nose walker. In fact, it has a name, Nasobema lyricum. Yes, if I say so. If they say so.
It runs around and gets in people's noses.
No, it's quite large. It's the size of a mouse, a good-sized mouse. It showed up in a 1989 textbook in Europe, and it's called, in popular terms, a nose walker. It doesn't exist. So your comment, if you say so, is most appropriate. It pays to nose around when you read a biology textbook. This was in a biology textbook at the college level. It's a fake. It's phony. It was just recently found to be a fake. In fact, the man that supposedly proposed it was writing under a pseudonym. His real name, it shows up under the name Stumpke as the professor that wrote this, but his real name is Steiner. It's not real. It's not real. And everybody knows it's not real, or at least they do now. Most scientists knew it wasn't real before. But it was in a 1989 college-level biology textbook in Europe. In fact, I think it was in Germany. And it even has the picture and the various classes of pictures. It was used as an example of how far and extensive evolution can take you. The kind of major changes that evolution can cause to happen. But again, this wouldn't be impossible. It would certainly be a possible thing. But if it was, it's because God created it that way. But the point is, just because you find something in a textbook does not mean that it's true. This is another of the examples. Here's one right here. It's a fake, it's phony, it's not real. Fortunately, you will not find this in any of, that I know of, any American textbooks on biology or zoology. But you will find in American textbooks on biology and zoology Ernst Haeckel's infamous drawings that show the development in the womb of the human being, supposedly from the fish stage to the human stage. And those are fake. He was convicted of fraud in 1901, but they're still in today's textbooks. It pays to nose around. Just because something is in a biology textbook, if it doesn't make sense, it isn't necessarily true. And Mrs. Balton's comment is so good, if you say so. But just because I say so doesn't make it right, does it? Especially if I create something like this. Why do people do this? I don't know. They're trying to prove a point, I guess. In fact, in this little article here in Creation magazine, the author says, who knows? It's either a prank, just to be funny, or the guy was really trying to be deceptive. Another very famous prank is Piltdown Man. Ever hear of Piltdown Man? Some of you probably have. A lot of younger students don't. It doesn't show up, by the way, in any of the biology books because it's such an embarrassment. He was found to be a fake only in 1952. There are practicing professors today who earned their PhDs by doing research on Piltdown Man. Get that. They have earned doctorates by studying a fake and didn't know it. And most of them are retired now or dead, but some are still teaching. So there you have it. Don't trust science. Don't trust scientists. Nose around when you see something that looks a little funny. There is one book and one book only that you can trust, and we call it the Holy Bible. Thank you. For better or for worse, this is not a marriage announcement, but the world around us. There's a scientist here, who's in one of the latest, well actually it's an older one now, Creation magazine. His name is Dr. Ian McCready. And he's a research biologist. His field is molecular biology and microbiology. He's fairly well known. He's authored over 60 papers. He's out of Australia. The idea... Oh, I know. Well, he can... The idea of evolution is things getting better, not worse. Improvement. That's the whole concept. You know, the whole idea of evolution, if you're going to be here, if any of you listen to W. Bach, we have some radio announcements going on now. One of them I start off saying, in the beginning there was nothing, and then it exploded, creating matter, which coalesced into rocks, which in the presence of water formed frogs, which evolved into a princess, or princesses and princes. Ludicrous, silly. But that is the foundational concept of evolution. Things got better. Things got more complex. Things got more complicated, from the simple to the complex. Well, what does the research of Dr. McCready actually show? I think you know what the answer is going to be. We asked Dr. McCready about the evidence for creation in the field of molecular biology. And his answer: evolution argues for things improving, whereas I see everything falling to pieces. Genes being corrupted, mutations, which are mistakes in the DNA, causing an increasing community burden of inherited diseases. A very, well, heartless way for scientists have no heart, I guess, by and large, when they're doing their science. All things were obviously well designed initially and are now falling apart. That's the summary of Dr. Ian McCready. He goes on to say, in fact, that he believes viruses were not created, but viruses are shrapnel, if you will, from DNA. Interesting. Things do not get better. You do not experience, nor will you see things improving in nature. That's the foundation of evolution, and it's a lie. It doesn't work that way. Things crumble. Well, just look at me. I used to have black hair. And now I'll get insulting. Look in the mirror. You probably look older than you did 20 years ago if you're 20 years old. You young kids are lucky. You haven't started to fall apart yet. Look at your parents. Things don't get better. Science has not shown ever, there's not one single incident of an increase in information that has ever been found. You remember Dr. Ken Hovind, the videos we have from him? There's never been an incident of increased information ever found by any scientist, ever. Quite a powerful statement. And yet they insist on teaching evolution because it keeps God out. Well, you know better. For better or for worse, it's for worse in nature. It's for better when you accept Jesus Christ as Savior. He made you perfect. You blew it. He didn't. It's your fault, not his. And he's on his way, if you accept him as Savior, to make you better. Thank you. This has been a good start this morning. I should go check the sign, see if I'm in the right church. We sounded alive. That was great. Praise God. What do creationists believe? That's the question. Now, I've gone through this a lot. Now, this is going to be a chance for you to say something, or think anyway, I hope. What is it that a creationist actually believes? And that becomes critical. I'm going to read a statement here. This is from the little booklet that comes out from the Answers in Genesis people. But this is interesting. There is a textbook used widely in America teaching about evolution. It's sent to thousands of public schools around the United States, and it misrepresents, according to Dr. Safadi, who is a creationist, the creationist view. But let me read something and see if you agree with this statement. On page 11 of this book, it says, the explanation provided in Genesis is that God created everything in its present form over the course of 6 days. Is that your view? No! Not at all. It's so important that you actually understand what your view is. What is it you believe as a creationist? What do you believe as a Christian? We have an awesome God, and you should be excited about that. But no, never have I said, and never has any creationist said, and the Bible does not say, that God created everything in its present form in 6 days. Doesn't say that.
Daddy.
It says He created everything in 6 days according to its kind. Now, dogs are a kind. Right? Cats are a kind. Don't forget who it was that invented the concept, or discovered, or proposed first the concept of natural selection. It was not Darwin. Darwin stole it. 24 years prior to Darwin, a scientist named Edward Blythe proposed the great modification within the kinds through a concept that we now know as natural selection. A creationist does not challenge, of course, natural selection. We invented it. Right? Creationist scientists who are creationists invented the concept of natural selection. We discovered it first. Darwin just used it. The reason he was so popular is he used it to build a platform that removed God. That was why Darwin became so popular. No one's ever heard of Edward Blythe. Have you ever heard of Edward Blythe other than me mentioning him? Probably not. Probably not. Why? Because he did it to honor God. So anybody that does anything in the field of science to honor God is going to be ignored, basically. But anyhow, bottom line is, if you're talking to people, young people going to high school, taking biology, when you talk to people, talk to your teachers, talk to your friends, don't fall into the trap of saying, no, we don't believe in natural selection. Yes, you do. In fact, you actually believe in what's called microevolution. We don't like to use the word because the minute you say evolution, automatically people think rocks to frogs to princess. Right? That's what people automatically think. In fact, in my son's biology book from Thornton Academy last year, they mentioned because microevolution works, therefore macroevolution works. Well, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely an insane. It's totally insane. It's not supported in observation. It's not supported by logic. You believe in microevolution. It's called natural selection. Changes within a kind. What you and I do not believe in, that a rock in the presence of water and energy over a period of billions of years could become a frog. That's what we don't believe. That a rock could have the increased information inserted into it to become a living creature. That's what we do not believe. We believe that only God Himself can insert information. So be clear what you believe. Be clear what you believe. Do not tell people that you believe that every living creature that wanders around the face of the earth today was created by God during the 6 days of creation identified in Genesis. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. We believe that God created the dog kind, and within the dog kind it just blew up into what we have now, which includes poodles. Remember what Ken Ham says about poodles? He says even poodles, although they're not really dogs, are included in the dog family. If you listen to some of the Institute for Creation Research tapes with Ken Ham, he says a lot of funny things about poodles. But anyhow, be very, very clear. I don't think I can stress this too much. You're dealing with the enemy. You're dealing with Satan. You're dealing with the enemy of God. Evolution comes from Satan. That's where it comes from. You're dealing with God's deadly enemy. So be crystal clear as to what you say. Be crystal, crystal clear. You believe that God created kinds. You also believe as a creationist in natural selection, and don't ever forget this, and tell an evolutionist this, because they probably don't know it either. Your kind of people, Bible-believing godly men, or a Bible-believing godly man, was the first one to publish the concept of natural selection, and his name was Dr. Edward Blythe. Thank you. Yes. Information, please. You know, as I look out here this morning, it absolutely flabbergasted me. Last Sunday, the place was packed. It was hot enough to roast a chicken in the church. With the windows open, you could feel hot air coming in. And a lot of you that are here now weren't here last Sunday, and yet it's quite, go figure. I have no idea. It was hard to figure. Information, please. Where do you get information? Well, as you know from the commercials you see now, if you dial on the, AT&T, if you dial 00 or something like that, they'll hook you. All you got to know is that a shop in Chicago that does pink poodles, and they'll hook you up with them, right? But where does information come from? I want to talk a little bit about information inside your cell. Now remember, the whole concept of evolution is that nothing exploded, became a rock, the rock evolved into a frog, and the frog evolved into a prince or a princess. That's the basic fundamental issue of evolution. Bear in mind, it takes a lot of information to go from a rock to a prince. Although there are probably some wives here that would say, no, I have a husband that's very much like a rock, about the same kind of information, but seriously, it does. Dr. Ian McCready, I've mentioned him before, has his PhD in molecular biology. He works in the field of molecular biology and microbiology, works for the Australian government. He's the author of more than 60 research papers, and he's still working. That's really an amazing feat. I worked in a research lab for almost 4 years. I published one paper and had 2 more in the works before I moved to the Navy. Once I got to the Navy, I was not doing the same type of thing. I was not doing that kind of research. To publish 60 papers and still be working is just an absolutely phenomenal thing. This guy is a pretty smart guy. He works for the, well, I won't give you the title, it's a very long title. But anyway, he works in biochemistry and molecular biology. That's his job. So here he's asked a question. He said, where in the cell does information come from? And he says, you know, it's all you see in the lab are gene duplications, reshuffling of existing genes, or defective genes. A gene is just simply a little segment of a DNA. That's all it is. But you never see any new information arising in a cell. You get that? You never see new information arising in a cell. He goes on to say that they have now mapped out basically the genes in the DNA for a simple yeast cell, and there are 6,000 genes, and each gene has quite a few segments in it. That's awesome. That's just in simply a yeast cell. And he said there are a lot of surprises. How do cells store information? There are little connections. You know the DNA is a ladder, and you twist the ladder, and the rungs of the ladder are the connections. They're called nucleotides. That doesn't matter. Those connections are where the information is stored. That's how you store information. That's the coding. Well, here's something kind of fascinating. He says, you know, the same stretch of DNA can code for different proteins by simply shifting the reading frame. So from one rung to another, you just shift the reading frame. He said an extremely clever and amazingly ingenious way to store extra information. Well, isn't that something? He's talking, of course, about something created by God. The problem for evolution is that for a rock to gain all of the kind of information it would need to become a simple cell is mind-boggling. We, at this point here, according to Dr. McCready, do not really fully understand how information is stored and used in a simple cell like a yeast cell. And yet, we are taught in science today as if it is an absolute given that fact is evolution and fancy is creation. And I would like to say that I believe exactly the opposite. Fancy is evolution, and fact is creation. And he says, he also goes on to say, sometimes a bacteria will inject information into another one. So it's new to that bacteria, but that's nothing. That doesn't mean anything. There is no instance of a cell gaining by itself information. None at all. Where does information come from? Information must be inserted by a designer. A book with no information inserted is just a book of white blank pages. Information has to be inserted by an author, by a designer, and this is a man who is well credentialed in the field of molecular biology. a man that is recognized worldwide in his field, working today as a molecular biologist in Australia. And he basically concludes, no, it's impossible. Evolution is impossible. Information, please. Where does information come from? From God and God alone. The information in your cell, the information in your body was put there by a designer. We know who that designer is. It is God. We even know a little more detail than that. It is Jesus himself. Thank you.
Look like a glowing octopus.
That's not the picture I want. No, I know. There he is. I don't know what I was thinking. I wouldn't have used these two props except that I happen to have them here from yesterday. We were talking about creation on this workshop all weekend long, Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday night. The idea of rocks to frogs evolution is what we've been talking about. And when you go from the rock to the frog, you have a lot of problems. It's not an easy step if there is no designer involved. Now, to the glowing octopus. And I'll use my apple. This is a picture of a glowing octopus. It is underwater, way below light. It is not reflecting light. It is generating its own light. And it does this with a chemical reaction, electrochemical reaction. Of course, all chemical reactions are electrochemical. But it produces what's called luminescence, and it has luciferin molecules. That's what creates light way, way deep underwater. Now here's the problem with the glowing octopus. It does not have suckers on its tentacles. Its tentacles instead glow. Now the reason it doesn't need suckers is because by glowing deep underwater where there is no light, it is able to attract other little fish that live deep underwater and then just simply eat them by wrapping its arms around the little fish. The suckers on the tentacles would be absolutely worthless down here. So the problem is, how did an octopus go from an octopus that had suckers on its tentacles to an octopus that didn't have suckers on the tentacles, instead would glow? That is the problem that we talked about many times here, that Dr. Michael Behe has addressed, the mousetrap man, if you will. The idea of irreducible complexity that gets a point where you can't get any simpler. If you do, it just doesn't work. Now, I did this with a chunk of bread yesterday. I'm going to do this with an apple this morning. Many of you were not here yesterday, but I lost some of my little young audience here. Let me see. Eric, if I were to give you this, what would you do with it? Dangerous question. How would you put it inside? You a little shy? He'd bite it. You'd bite it, right? You put it in your mouth. What if you didn't have a mouth? Can you get this apple through your eye? Can you stick it through your ear? Could I ram it up my nose? Be kind of hard. Can I pound it through the top of my head? No, because that's pretty hard. My wife can tell you that. There's only one way to get this apple inside of you, and that's to go through your mouth. Well, what if you don't have a mouth? What if you don't have a mouth? That is the idea of irreducible complexity. That is the whole concept of the mousetrap man, if you will. And that's what evolution relies on. What evolution relies on is that if you are born without a mouth, it's not a problem. Eventually you'll have children that will have a mouth. Well, there's a problem there. If you're born without a mouth, you won't live. If you have no mouth, there's no way that you're going to get married and have children. Right? It just will not happen. First off, you can't attract a wife without a mouth. Right? I mean, you couldn't talk to her. There'd be no kissing. What a horrible thought. Well, the scientist that reports on this glowing octopus says the same thing. Since its tentacles, if it had intermediate tentacles that had neither light transmission or suckers on it, they would be worthless. It would be good for neither suction nor light. Its possessors would probably be eliminated by natural selection. not favored by natural selection. You see, we believe in natural selection. Creationists invented it. I mentioned that many times. Dr. Edward Blythe developed natural selection philosophy long before Charles Darwin. Published it 24 years before Darwin's Origin of Species. The whole idea of natural selection is that you develop what you need to survive. Up to a point. Up to a point. If you don't have the right stuff, you aren't going to make it. This octopus, this glowing octopus, is an absolute marvel. Open your eyes. As a scientist, as a budding biologist, if you are one, open your eyes and look at things like this and see the glory of God. Because only a designer could do this. Evolution has no mechanism for this to happen. It breaks down, like Dr. Michael Behe says, who was not even a creationist himself. It breaks down because this would be, an intermediate stage would be too simple. Just plain too simple. It would have broken the law of irreducible complexity. It would be functionless. It can't slowly develop, and by the way, there are no transition stages here. It cannot slowly develop glowing tentacles that have lost their suckers. It either has suckers or it does not. It was designed to do what it does, and it was designed to do what it does very well, and it does what it was designed to do very well, don't you think? I'm stealing from Ken Ham now. Thank you. Your brain and a monkey's brain. What's the difference? Is there a difference? Should there be a difference? Well, evolutionary scientists have been monkeying around with your brain. They have suspected for a long time that your brain and a monkey's brain must be exactly alike because monkeys are the closest evolutionary ancestor to you. Or so they think. Well, they have discovered something startling to them. And this is from Science Daily. It's not something that is from a creationist, per se. But they're startled. Monkeys' brains are different than your brains. Now, I'm not saying that a monkey's brain is smaller or larger. I suppose it depends on the size of the monkey. But now through MRI, the magnetic resonance imaging that we're able to do, by the way, a process invented by a creationist scientist, they're able to tell specifically the short-term memory area of the brain. Believe it or not, in spite of some of the people in this church, short-time memory in human beings is greater than in monkeys. I'm not looking at anybody in particular. We have a larger capacity for short-term memory. I don't know what it means as you get older and you start to lose that. But it's in a whole different place. That's the key. You have a larger capacity for short-term memory than a monkey, and it's in a whole different area. The area that they thought that was similar between yourself and a monkey is used for very different things in a human and a monkey. Well, fancy that. Something that we would have suspected right along. Monkeys and human beings are different. The short-term memory of a human being is superior. Every time I bite my tongue when I say that, because I know people that will forget as soon as they leave this church something that's been said to them. Probably most of you, no insult intended, but most of you will probably forget the sermon as soon as I'm done. Larry Stromberg, who used to be pastor here, said, "Brian, I did something I will never do again." When I finished my master's at Moody Bible College, they said, "You ought to find out how well you're communicating with your church." So he did that. He preached a sermon and then handed out index cards, and that wasn't from me, right? Index cards, and said, "Write down one of the three main points of my sermon." He'll never do it again. 90% of the people had no clue what he was trying to say. They wrote down interesting points, but had nothing to do with his sermon. But nonetheless, regardless of all that, according to science, you have greater short-term memory than a monkey, and it's in a whole different area than a monkey's brain. Your brain is unique, created by God uniquely for you. Just because a monkey has a brain that looks somewhat like yours does not mean you came from the monkey. It just simply means that God designed, it means a consistent designer. Why would he put a brain in a monkey's foot if it didn't belong in a foot? You would knock it senseless every time you took a walk, wouldn't you? The brain always would be up in here near the eyeballs. It's just common sense. It's just a logical design. The key is that you believe in a designer. The Bible tells you you're designed by God himself. We know that it's Jesus that designed you, and you are different. Don't let scientists monkey around your brain. Your brain is different from a monkey's brain. Far superior to a monkey's brain. Now, this may come as bad news to you high school kids getting ready to go back to school who probably thought your teachers did resemble monkeys. They don't. Now, to test your short-term memory, tonight, don't forget, at 6 o'clock, we're going to be at the Church of the Nazarene for a Singspiration. Tonight, 6 o'clock, Church of the Nazarene. Don't come here. If you come here, I will know that you're how close your brain is to a monkey's. Thank you. Maybe it's the wrong title for this morning. Human speech. Once again, in Creation magazine, there's a cute little article about human speech. My memory fails me. There is a play that I saw once, and part of the singing in the play is talk a little, talk a little. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I can't remember. But anyway, human speech. We like to talk. For the next year, while we are in the political campaigning going on, you will be hearing a lot of talking. Much talking. Well, you can thank God for that. Because God is the one who created us with the ability to talk. He also gave us ears. But we tend to use our vocal cords more than we use our ears. Vocal cords are very unique. I mentioned last Sunday night, when we have communion now, I do a creation moment Sunday night, I mentioned that apes and gorillas are not really as much like you as people think they are. Just because scientists think that apes look a lot like us, and I don't think they really do, and I held up a picture, if you remember, of a gorilla and myself, and I challenged you to tell me that we looked alike. Risky. Very risky. But there's something very unique about you that no gorilla has, no ape has, no chimpanzee has, no other animal has. It is your vocal cords, or vocal folds, if you will, that are located as it says here. And this is an article from New Scientist magazine, not from a creationist magazine, but from New Scientist magazine. It says, no other animal, and we're identified by scientists as animals, in the world has the ability for the type of speech that we do. Because our vocal cords are created very uniquely. They are created such that they slip down into our throat, which creates kind of a big hollow chamber, so we can make the variety of sounds that we make with our voice. We are unique in that way. There's no reason. Remember what evolution is based on. It's got to be better. Right? It's got to be for survival of the fittest. The very fact that there are still great big hairy critters running around that we identify as gorillas that can't speak like we do belies immediately the basic proposition of evolution that speech would be required for survival. They're still here without speech. You're unique, very unique, created in the very image of God, created with the ability to speak. Oh, by the way, there's one interesting thing here that is mentioned. Because of the location of your vocal cords, you cannot breathe, swallow, and talk simultaneously. So much for dinner time conversation, I guess. And I guess that explains why a talkative person is usually the last one to be done eating, right? I wish Chi were here, because oftentimes she's still sitting there eating when the rest of us are done, because she's been doing a lot of talking. Those of you that know Chi will understand that. You're unique, very, very unique. Do not fall sucker to the crazy teaching of the world that you are just like a gorilla, that you're just a tiny bit different, that it's obvious that you are evolved. It's not obvious at all. You're very special. You're created uniquely. There is no other animal in the world, and we are animals by definition, no other animal in the world that can do with your voice what you can do. No other animal can talk the way that you and I talk. Thank you. I've learned a couple of new tricks this morning. So you can teach old dogs new tricks. Now, those of you that come from the decade of the 50s or are involved with the decade of the 50s, the title that I use for the creation moment, Rock Around the Clock, will make you think of, what was his name? I've forgotten anyway, but anyway, yeah. The rock and roll artist who died on the airplane with the Big Bopper and a bunch of other people. Buddy Holly, right. How long does it take to make a rock? Now, some of you have heard me over the years, and I keep coming up with new things because to show you, because it's important. It's important that we understand that the Bible is accurate. The Bible is God's Word. And when the Bible says, and when the Holy Spirit says through the Holy Scripture that God created the earth, and we believe no more than 10 or 20,000 years ago, it's accurate. It's not a foolish thought. Having just said that, you think that I probably sound like an idiot if you're new here. How could the world possibly be only 20 to 25,000 years old, or maybe even less than that? After all, we have rocks outside. Some of us have rocks inside. But how long does it take to make a rock? There's an interesting little statement in the latest Creation magazine that scientists have now discovered that mud turns into rocks far quicker than they ever thought. And they now credit a certain kind of bacteria to doing that. It doesn't really take that long to make a rock. But most of us think in terms of thousands and thousands and thousands of years, or maybe even a million years. Well, here is a clock in a rock. This is a picture, and maybe I should pass this around. I think perhaps I will. Well, you see it right there. This is a picture of a clock in a rock. It's a clock, obviously, that is not millions and millions of years old. It is not thousands and thousands of years old. It's fairly new. It's within a few hundred years that they had the ability to make this kind of a clock. And I'll pass this around just so you can take a peek at it. This rock, totally wrapped around a clock with some other kinds of things around it. Does not take long to make a rock. Rocks can form very quickly. Scientists now realize or now postulate that bacteria helps mud turn into rocks. You didn't get a chance to see that. I'll start it with this gorgeous young lady right here. How's that? There's a picture of a clock stuck in a rock. Does not take millions of years to make a rock. Takes a very short time. So far, everything that scientists uncover, and that's the purpose of my little creation moment, is to encourage you with that and to show you that type of thing. Everything that scientists uncover points towards a universe, points towards a solar system, points towards a creation of all this stuff. Points towards a beginning, points towards a creation not all that long ago. The clock around the rock. Rock around the clock, as I called it. Doesn't take long to make a rock. Thank you. The Holy Spirit interprets to God what we sing and say. I'd hate to think that he was listening to some of the things that we're singing. Amazing Leaf is the title for this morning's creation moment. Daniel, what's that? Ignore the deacons. What's that? It's a leaf, all right? Oh, the other kids are leaving. Brandon, that's a leaf, right? A leaf, yes, that's a leaf. Do you know that this leaf can talk to bugs? Would you believe that? This is an amazing leaf. Or maybe not this one in particular. But a leaf just like this one. See, this one is kind of a dead and dying leaf. That's why it's lost its green color. But leaves can talk to bugs. They can actually communicate. There's a very interesting article. The title of it is called Smart Plants, and it's a CNN website spot that they took this from. Researcher has discovered that many plants, and it identifies, this happens to be, I believe, a maple, right? Oh, that's an oak. Oh, that's an oak? Well, anyway. I only took one biology course. Yes. Anyway, cotton, corn, tobacco, apparently not oak trees, I don't know, but certain leaves. This is fascinating. That when they are attacked by caterpillars, they make a chemical change within the leaf, and it sends out a call to a wasp. As a matter of fact, depending on the kind of caterpillar that's attacking it, the leaf changes its chemistry and calls for a different wasp. So the same leaf can actually call for 2 or 3 different wasps. Specifically, the kind of wasp that will eat the caterpillar that is now bothering it. And I suspect oaks are pretty stupid trees because I have quite a few dead oaks. In my property, they're dead because they were attacked by the tent caterpillars, and they were not smart enough to call for a wasp to eat the tent caterpillars. But certain plants do. A leaf like this, isn't that amazing? So I love the conclusion. The evolutionist scientists that noticed this or reported this said, "Isn't evolution amazing?" You know, that's like going out and looking at your car and saying, "Isn't it amazing what an explosion in a junkyard can do?" Right? Evolution means by accident. That's a design. Now, no question, my daughter Lori teaches at Thornton, and there's a new biology teacher, and they were chatting, and they were talking about microevolution. And we believe, by the way, in microevolution. I hope you understand that. Microevolution is observable. It's nothing but toning down or refining what God has created. In fact, it was invented by a man named Dr. Edward Blythe. Almost 24 years he published before Charles Darwin did his work. Natural selection is microevolution. So the leaves were designed by God to be smart. Microevolution could cause it to be just a little bit more focused, if you will. But it was designed. It could not by its own come up with this. A leaf doesn't have that kind of brain structure, right? It couldn't do it by itself. It's designed. What an amazing, incredible, wonderful world we live in. And I really didn't know that until I read this. I didn't realize that leaves could call for certain specific kinds of bugs. That's something that I learned myself just last week. So there you have it. An amazing leaf. A leaf that can actually talk to bugs. Right? What a wonderful...
It also talks to other leaves.
Well, maybe. I don't know. I'm not aware of that. You'd have to see Charlie for that. Charlie believes that this leaf can talk to another leaf. Maybe so. See Charlie. What an amazing world that we have. What an amazing world that God has created. Thank you. Creation moment, and I've got a combination creation moment introduction for this morning's portion of the conference is second-class citizens. And what do I mean by that? I'm a creationist. Most of you that know me know that I'm a scientist. Those of you that don't know me, I'll tell you, I'm a scientist. I'm trained in chemical engineering, have a graduate degree in physics, worked for 31 years as a research physicist. I ran into a Methodist minister and his wife one time, and now you'll understand when I finish this story why theological degrees are not impressive to me, and probably why 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy tell you that it's not your knowledge and education that matters, it's your heart. And she said to me, "How can you be a scientist and believe in creation?" And I said, the question really is, how could I be a scientist working with the steady laws of physics day in and day out, seeing the repetitive structure and nature of the world that I live in, and be dumb enough to think that it happened by accident? That's the real question. Anyway, I am a staunch creationist and very, very vocal about it. Darwin, in his famous voyage, and this is unusual, you don't see me too often using the National Geographic to talk from, but I just...
National Pornographic.
Dr. Ken Hovind, somebody mentioned him yesterday. I love him. His comment is about creation and evolution. If you are an evolutionist, he said, are you dumb in any other area? But Darwin, in his famous voyage on the Beagle, the HMS Beagle, turned the world upside down. And in that voyage, he ran into some people called Fuegians off the island of where is it? Fugo, I don't know. Anyway, they're called Fuegians. It's an island that the Beagle ran into somewhere, and he got off and met these people. And he writes in his journal, the main conclusion that man is descended from lowly organized form will, I regret to think, be highly distasteful, but it is obvious, I'm quoting now, we are descended from barbarians. And he's looking at the Fuegians when he says this. He says, man may be excused for feeling some pride at having risen above these barbarians. He goes on to say that you're wasting your time to even try to teach these people because they evolved from a lower form. That's Darwin. That's why this church takes such a strong stance on creation. And I want to share with you, although most of you know it, in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, what we're really descended from. And over here on verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And then down in verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And you know what? If you read the history of the Maoris, they were brutalized by well-intentioned people. They were not treated as human because they must be evolved from a low form. And you know what else? I honestly believe that good Christians have let this philosophy of evolution permeate their thinking to the extent that they themselves, after you share the gospel with a native, there are some tragic stories of the past where we assume that we're the intelligent ones and we don't try to teach them. There are no second-class citizens. Every single human being is created by God. And you've been appointed for a task from the time you're in your mother's womb. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. Before I formed you in your womb, I set you aside, God says. Everybody here has a job to do, appointed from the very beginning. And today we're focusing on missions. We've had an exciting conference, I think. I've been very, very blessed this weekend. And as we get into this morning's service, we're going to have Steve Carter, who's a missionary to the Japanese, will be showing us a video and speaking. We're going to have the quartet from New Brunswick Bible Institute share with us, and Robert Booker, Professor Booker from New Brunswick Bible Institute. And I just want to leave all of you with this thought as we think about missions and think about people. Every single human being is created lovingly by the hand of God. There is no such thing as a second-class citizen. The theory of evolution and its concept that there are inferior people is garbage. It's a putrid stench in the nostrils of the world. And the tribes, if you go to a tribe, you're going to be in Japan, a highly industrialized nation. If you go to a tribe, there's a fantastic video. I think everybody that is thinking about missions ought to see it. It's the other side of the mountain, or over this mountain, or something like that. A young man from an Indian tribe developed a language and translated the scripture, and all of his Bible college teachers said, you can't do that. It's impossible. He did it. I can't think of the exact name. Phil knows it. You can see him after. But there are no second-class citizens. That's how I want to introduce this missions conference special Sunday morning service to you. Every single one of you here is handcrafted by the hands of God. We're handcrafted in the womb. And every one of you has been prepared and appointed to a task. And the concept of evolution has nothing to do with science. Nothing at all. There are thousands of scientists that think it's a foolish idea, including dear old Dr. Crick, who was one of the two that developed and mapped out the DNA molecule. He said it's impossible for this to happen by accident, therefore it came from outer space. I'm not making that up. It's called panspermia. That's the theory. Everybody's special. Everybody is important because everybody is created by God. We're all sinners. We're all unworthy. But every one of us is hand-formed by God. In fact, the scripture tells us Jesus. Everyone is special. And everyone is exactly alike. Whether you're Asian, Caucasian, Indian, you are exactly alike, created in the very image of God. Thank you. And I'll turn it over back to Charlie.